What a delight to be here tonight with you in Southern California. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico now, and I left this morning, mid-morning, amid a snowstorm, wild winds, and when the plane was sitting on the tarmac, it was rocking. To give you an idea of what the wind was like. So it was, so landing in Southern California was like, wow, it's nice here. And the sun's out. But I do love Santa Fe for many, many reasons. But what I want to do before I ask our panel to engage our panel, I wanted to just set the stage for what we're going to do. We're going to focus first on their stories and what themes have brought them to, in their life, have brought them to where they are now, and the life experiences that have connected as a result of their different experiences, again, to bring them where they are now. And then we're going to take a little break, and we'll come back and do a little dialogue about what it takes to raise funds, like money, like getting the green stuff in the door, and having enough to operate your organization with, whatever your organization is. We'll have a little fun with that, I think. And then close off with a dialogue about what's happening in our environment today in terms of the political and budgetary influences on the arts, and what should we as leaders in the arts and in philanthropy, as well as in this world where we want to build a culture that has depth, meaning, and respects every individual and the gifts that they bring. So how do we preserve that? What do we do as leaders in the field of art, as well as leaders in whatever community that we're a part of, to make sure that all of those things that are important to us and important to us as a people and a nation continue. So starting off, I started my doctoral work looking at adult development. And because I was intrigued with the models that existed about how do we develop as individuals. And so much of psychology is built around child development. And just as in the medical field, there was an assumption that all the tests that occurred with men would apply to women, which was erroneous. The same thing goes for adult development. What's happening with children in the stages that are predictable for children aren't necessarily predictable for individuals in their adult lives. And I particularly looked at what are the things we need to do to renew ourselves, number one, and secondly, how do we connect the dots as we move through our life? And so my metaphor is a slinky, and that is that life is this series of interconnected circles, that we have chapters, and that most of you are in early chapters of your life. And I can assure you that there are many chapters to come, and that each one of your chapters, you squeeze out of that chapter, what do I have to learn from that? What is the dominant theme that is maybe a life theme for me as I move through my life? And as I reflected on my life, the life themes that were important to me that I've consistently seen through my life are leadership, education, and community. And I can see all those pieces coming together in terms of everything I did. So having said this and brought my slinky, and it's not one of those fun ones, it's a tiger or a lion or something, it's just pretty straightforward slinky. But life does have its quality of expanding and contracting, just like a slinky. But we've got these connective chapters. So what I want to talk with our women leaders about are, first of all, what a major theme or a significant theme or themes in your life, And how has that theme or those themes connected as you moved through life? And tell us what those life chapters felt like and how you've developed to where you are. Now, having said that, I want to get something out of the way first. And so I'm going to ask Katharine first, or Kathy. You heard what she does. And she was backstage at the Oscars on Sunday night, and she's sending me texts. She was sending me texts and pictures of this thing and that thing. But I want you to connect that. You can give us a little story, but also connect that to one piece of your life and then backtrack. And you know which piece of your life I'm talking about.
I'm sure I do. I'm sure I know which piece I'm supposed to talk about. I was not backstage, but I was in the house. So I started this slightly wacky new job at the Academy Museum, which is being built on the corner of Fairfax and Wilshire, just right down the road here, in November. And if we're talking about themes, a theme in my life would be a passion for the arts and a passion for creativity and a passion for supporting artists. And also another big thread, I think, for all of us is raising money and being comfortable raising money. The job that I had before this job was I got invited by the presidents of the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations to start an organization called United States Artists. And United States Artists gives 50 artists a year $50,000 each. And I was there for 8 years. I got it off the ground. I started a crowdfunding site for artists called USA Projects. Total blast, really loved it. It was a fantastic experience. And one of the artists who got our grant was Barry Jenkins, who won for Moonlight. And I saw Barry. I think the outside world sees the Oscars as kind of like one night. But what it really is, it's like 6 months of this slog that these people have to go through the awards. It's just this endless slog of, this event and that event and this celebration and that competition. And it's so much work. And it starts in the fall with something called the Governor's Awards. And so all these folks who are contenders go to this event called the Governor's Awards. And Barry just happened to be at the table next to mine. So I kind of slid over, and his whole cast was there, and I'd just seen the movie. And it was just beginning to get a little bit of buzz. And I reintroduced myself. I don't know if you remember me, but I'm Katharine DeShaw, and I ran United States Artists. And oh my gosh, yes, of course I remember you. He said, you gave me that $50,000 grant. I used it to make the movie.
Isn't that awesome?
And I was like, oh,
isn't that awesome? Talk about connectivity.
It's really cool. And he's the second person who won an Academy Award. The first was Laura Poitras, who won for Citizen4. But USA was very much about funding women artists, funding artists of color. I mean, it was just this incredible thing. So I was just, secretly cheering him on, and then, sitting there in the back of that theater and watching that like crazy moment last Sunday night. And it was kind of beautiful in a way. I mean, because they all knew each other. I think what most people, because they'd been to all these award ceremonies for so many months. This time you're getting this award. Okay, now it's our turn to get that award. So they all knew each other. And so I think the grace that was shown on the stage that night is very indicative of people who have gotten to know each other, people who work really hard, artists who are struggling every single day to get their work shown and on stages and in theaters. So I guess that's my story and a theme of my life.
Though. Let's
go back
a couple of chapters. So how did you end up? Because you didn't start in the arts.
Well,
right?
I kind of did.
You had as part of a life theme.
I've been in and out.
Right?
So I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, and
It's cold there.
It's cold there. It's cold there right now, I'm sure. I'll keep the weather on my phone for Duluth. and my experience in Duluth was, I, like so many, I think, folks, particularly of our generation, went to public schools. And the public schools were great. And we had fantastic arts programs. And anything you wanted to do in the arts was available to you. And you didn't even think about it. You could take dance, you could sing, you could paint, you could do ceramics, you could tell stories, you could draw. It was just part of everyday life for us as children. And so then as I moved into my career, one of the first jobs I got was running a little dance company in Chicago. And, I didn't know a Martha Graham from a Graham Botma. It was just like, what do you know about dance? I'm like, not a lot, Well, we need a company manager. What do you know about managing? Nah, never really done that. And the lady was like, I like you. I'm going to hire you. And so she just took this blind leap of faith in this kid from Duluth, Minnesota. I mean, I got to be honest, and it was that, and I think all of us have done that in our lives where we've just sort of seen a spark in somebody and said, you're the girl for me. And so thus began my career in dance. And I studied dance when I was running this little company called the Chicago Moving Company. And eventually ended up in New York. I worked for a choreographer, probably the most famous choreographer in the world at that time, Twyla Tharp. Worked for the Tharp Company. They went on the road. I helped book them on tours. I did 2 books with Richard Avedon. I helped produce the company on Broadway. 24 years old, like, what do I know about Broadway? It's just like I was just thrown into these crazy situations and just kind of like kept rolling. But what really, the left turn that my life took was, a lot of the dancers started dying. This was the 80s in New York, and the arts community was devastated by AIDS. And I'd worked in dance for a while, and then I had this funny little left turn where I was working at the Multiple Sclerosis Society. It was a career advancement thing for me, more money, running kind of fun, big special events. And then all these people start dying. And I have this weird double major, arts and health. And I was approached by the Gay Men's Health Crisis, which was and still is the world's largest AIDS organization in New York City, and invited to be their head of development. And that was the crazy left turn, the really hard left turn, really interesting. And what I found was things I'd learned working in a disease organization, I could bring to this organization. Things I'd learned working in the arts, I could bring to this organization. And so I've kind of moved in and out of the arts. I've consulted in environmental issues, public radio, Anti-Recidivism Coalition has been a recent client of mine. So I've had this kind of weird, funny career, but it always comes back to the arts and the power of creativity. And I had my own little fun victory celebration on Sunday night with Barry. That was a full circle thing, so I will stop talking.
Wow. That was great, huh? Great story. So you can see the Slinky effect, right? Okay, Susan.
So I also have come to fundraising in a not traditional way. And I started my career as an attorney. I actually was a litigator with a big firm here in Los Angeles, Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher, and I did that for 17 years. But along the way, that whole time that I was litigating and raising a family and pretty busy, I was passionate about music and about specifically choral music, which was something I was exposed to while I was in college, really starting my last year of high school. And I am, to this day, 37 years later, still a volunteer choral singer. I sing in 2 community choruses, and I'm on the board of the Los Angeles Master Chorale, which is our professional chorus, and also on the board of the national, actually U.S. and Canada support organization for choruses, which is called, big surprise, Chorus America. And so how did I go from being a lawyer to working for the LA Phil? Well, the chapter analogy is a good one. My first chapter, I would say, being a volunteer board member involved with the arts, learning a bit about how arts organizations survive, how they are funded, what makes them go, how projects get started, from the standpoint of being a board member, wanting your organization to succeed. That was while I was at Gibson, Dunn & Crutcher. Then I left my partnership at Gibson Dunn and went to your friendly now independent public media station, KCET, which at that point was the West Coast flagship PBS station, as their general counsel. And that was a move from being a lawyer with lots of clients to a lawyer with one client. But very early on in my career at KCET, my boss, the CEO, said to each of his senior executives, you really need to be helping us with a revenue function. And he said to me, not unlike what you said, he said, I think you'd be really great raising money from foundations. And I said, huh? And he said, no. He said, it's a lot of writing and it's a lot of deadlines and, you lawyers are really good at writing and deadlines. You'll be great. You'll do a great job at that. And all of those things were true. What was also true was it was very much about building trust and building relationships and making sure that these mostly private foundations, but also government and small family foundations, that they trusted that we were going to use their money the way they wanted it used and that we would do a good job with it. So I did the foundation fundraising for, I would say, about 6 years. And along the way, I learned a lot about fundraising in general. Specifically, I learned a lot about, among other things, the thing I do now, which is planned giving. And that's a long story, which I won't go into. But, pardon me? You should explain what planned giving is. Oh, okay. So planned giving, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is gifts that are left through your will or trust that benefit an organization. So being a lawyer is actually a really good thing for planned giving because you're talking to people about their wills, their trusts, in many instances more complicated types of trusts that allow you to leave a legacy for a charity. And in some instances will provide you with income during your life, and in some instances will provide the charity with income and then your family later on. So I went from being the general counsel at KCET to fast forward to January 1 of 2011. And for those of you who are not familiar with that date, KCET left PBS, was no longer a PBS member station, and became the largest independent public media organization in the United States. And at that point, my boss again came to me and said, I'm going to be reorganizing my executive team, and I think you'd do a really great job being in charge of all of our development, and I want to have a chief development officer, and I'd like you to be that person. And I went, really? I said, I'm a lawyer. How is that going to work? And he said, no. He said, I know you can do this job. And he had confidence, and I said, okay, I'll try it. It was like drinking water out of a fire hose. So I had 2 years, seriously, I had 2 years of leading all of the fundraising for KCET during a period of immense change, during a period in which there were many questions being asked about this decision to become an independent public media station. So it was very important for me to be a voice that people would trust and to be totally committed to the new KCET. So now we get to the third chapter of my life. So KCET, there was a natural breaking point for me to leave KCET, which is they merged with another public media organization, and it was pretty clear to me that it would be good for them to have a new development leader who was committed to the new organization. So I stepped away. I had some personal things going on in my life. I had a parent who was dying and a family that really needed me, and I took some time off. I did a little bit of consulting, and then I thought about what do I want my third chapter to be, and I kept coming back to music. Music was the thing that was my anchor to windward, my solace, my support during my entire life and during this very difficult time that I went through watching my dad die slowly. And I heard that the LA Phil was going to be really launching a major initiative around planned giving, and that they really were looking for a leader who would come in and build a program and take it to the next level, which sounded pretty exciting to me. So that's the work I'm engaged in now, and it's really an amazing place to work. It is an incredible organization from top to bottom, and that's my third chapter.
Great. So far you can see all these connections from that really is rooted in the theme, a life theme that developed very early in your lives. So Jane, Jane's life has been full, and she's done many things. So talk to us about your evolution, but primarily that theme that is the connecting theme in your life.
I grew up in England post-World War II, and growing up in a zone that has been a war zone where you remember planes flying over and hiding under the desk in case the bomb dropped on you. Not quite sure what they thought in school the bombs were going to do to us with the desks, but it seemed safe at the time.
Obviously worked.
It obviously worked. I too went to British public schools, which were very stratified, and won a scholarship to a school with a very smart green uniform. And when I was 12 years old, I realized at this school, like the public schools you're describing, one could do all kinds of things. One could paint and, go to acting classes and sing. And I signed up to be in the school play. Now you understand this was an all-girls school. I was always the tallest in my class and always had a relatively deep voice for a girl. So I came home from my first art class and said to my mother very proudly, "Mom, I've decided what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to be a painter." My father had died at the end of the war. My mother ran a small hotel with 2 daughters and supported all of us. And she said, "That's nice, dear. That's for Sundays." So 2 years later, I come home and I said, no, now I've really understood it. I'm going to be an actor. Because by now I had been the lead in the school play, the boy lead, you understand. I in all the years I acted, only ever played the male parts. And my mother just smiled indulgently. So by the time I was 16, I was directing plays and we were winning some prizes. So now I knew that I'd finally grown up. I came home and said, I am going to be a theater director. And if you could only understand how that must have sat in England, where you wore clothes handed down by 7 generations of girls, where you used every pencil to the last inch, where you wrote on every side of the paper, where you grew your own food, because we were on rationing for the first 14 years of my life. So there was not a lot around you. And for me, art, painting, visual art, the performing arts, reading, was my solace. It was a way to enter another world. I fell madly in love at the age of 11 with Hieronymus Bosch. And for you don't know Hieronymus Bosch, as I'm sure everyone in this room does, I was totally stunned by being inside one of those paintings. I did move on to El Greco. And so I went to university, and the university I went to had a theatre, a newly built theatre built by a very generous donor. And I knew that if I went inside that theatre, I would never, ever finish my degree. I would be a lost soul. So in all the years I was in college, I literally never stepped inside it until my very last day. My last term in college, someone came to me, and I might say this right from the beginning, I do not consider myself to be a fundraiser at all. And looking back, as we have this conversation, I've clearly been raising money my entire life.
That's right. That's true.
So someone came to me and said, how would you like to go to New York? And you must understand that no one got on airplanes. People didn't own suitcases. An airplane? I mean, really, an airplane to go to America was very far away. I said, I'd love it. Would love to go to New York. And they said, okay, I bet you can't sell all the seats in a big airplane to the students in this university to go to New York. And I said, well, what do I get if I do? They said, a ticket to New York and 4 days in the Y. So I said, done. Don't ask me why I actually thought I could do it. I had no idea why I thought I could sell 300 plane tickets when I didn't even know what a plane was. So I got on the plane, came to New York, and that is a whole saga. I arrived in New York. I had been in the English Peace Corps in the jungle in Malaya, which was, may I say, the forerunner of the American Peace Corps, and thought I was terribly chic. So I took all of my saved money and I sent it by wire to the bank in New York. When I arrived, they didn't have it. They couldn't find it. And I had $20. And now, I mean, if I call my mom and say, Mom, I don't have any money, she'll say, get on the plane and come home. Because she had this terrible feeling that I was going to come to America and never go back. And she was right. So I went to the bus station. It was terribly hot in New York, much hotter than the jungle. And I said, where is it cool? I've got $10. And they said, Boston, Bay 3. And I went to Boston. I ended up getting offered a job as long as I stayed a whole year, getting married, having 2 children, getting divorced. In the days when if you weren't married, by the time you were 27, you were seriously deficient. And people were terribly sorry for you. When I had my first child at 27, the doctor said, I'm very worried this is like an elderly birth.
Oh my goodness. How times have changed, eh?
And so I had 2 elderly births. Still here to tell the story, as are my daughters. And I ended up getting divorced when they were very small, when they were 1 and 3. And I thought, oh my God, I now need a trade union card. I can't be a painter or an actor because how am I going to pay the rent? Simmons College in Boston, which has been a fine all-women's college for a very long time, became completely insane, and they took 2 women professors from Harvard Business School who raised a fortune from Xerox, CBS, and the bank in Chicago, and they opened the first women's business school. All women, only women. I had friends at Harvard at the time, including the dean of the business school, who said to me, oh, for God's sake, come to Harvard, don't go there. So, but he put me through the interview process, and all the young men who did peer interviews said to me, oh, don't come here, nobody will talk to you. By the way, can I get a job in the consulting company you're working in now? And I was so angry and distressed that I got in my car and went across the river to Simmons, where they accepted me, God knows why, And there I was. We were told our first day that CBS and the Bank of Chicago and Xerox would hire the top 3 students in the class. I was in a class with women of all ages. The eldest student was 84.
Cool.
The average age was 30-something, 34, 35. Most of these women had had careers. It was at a time when women were a subset. Life has changed a lot, but we have a way to go. And I was determined that I was going to be one of those people. Even though half the class had PhDs, I'm not an academic. But I was determined that I was going to get that CBS job. I thought they might let me be an actor, or maybe they'd let me do something creative. And so when I finally got that job at CBS, I arrived at CBS in New York, and they put me in this huge room with all these guys, and I said, what am I doing here? And they said, you're a financial analyst.
Oi.
I said, I can't do math. Like, I'm not even good at counting. They said, you have an MBA in finance. And I said, oh, well, yes, but that was a one-time thing. And they said, well, what are you good at? And they looked at me and they said, well, you look like you should be in television. That was why they'd hired me. A law had just been passed where you had to have women in middle management. Trust me, they would never have hired me under any other circumstance. And I ended up writing speeches for the president of CBS, and I went on to have a career in television. I worked mostly in movies of the week, CBS, NBC. I literally talked my way into it because I was desperate somebody would find out that I literally couldn't add. And balance sheets were terrifying. And so I got hired by Time Inc., who had started this new company called HBO. And it was in the days when HBO was doing boxing matches in Vegas and taping live plays on the stage and putting them on television, and had 8 million people watching it over the course of a year. When I was at NBC, every morning on my chair, there was taped to the back of my chair the numbers for the movie I'd made the night before on that chair. And if it didn't save 58 million or higher, your job was gone. Those jobs completely depended on you reaching 1/3 of the American audience, which in those days was about 250 million people. And here I am in this startup company with most of the people that I worked with in Hollywood saying to me, are you insane? You have a career. You could run one of these companies one day. I didn't believe them, trust me. No woman in those days had actually run a company. Sherry Lansing was the first person to ever have one of those jobs. And so I'm at HBO, and the chairman of the board said to me, we like to make small features. We don't want to look like television movies. And I said, well, you need some money to do that. No, we only have the same budget as all the other companies. We just want you to make features. So why don't you go to LA? We'll give you an assistant and a credit card and an office, and you see what you can do. We created HBO Films. And the very first year, nobody knew what to do. Certainly nobody imagined that Elizabeth Taylor would make our very first movie with Carol Burnett called Between Friends. And it was the very first time vulva had ever been said aloud on American television. And so faced with, we want you to build, and they didn't say we want you to build HBO Films. They just said, we want you to see if you can build a business for us. And I thought it was interesting they chose a woman executive to do it, because if it failed, women executives could be replaced. And they were not going to risk one of their up-and-coming young male executives to do it. Needless to say, we were incredibly successful. But a part of that was, Jane, go find the money. And I thought, this is a recurring theme in my life. And so I literally got on a plane and went around the world. I had a yellow pad, I had an American Express card, and no cell phone. And I would just land in cities where I knew one person, and I would call them, and then I'd call the next person, and then I'd call the next person, and then I'd call the next person, until one day I am in the south of France at the Hotel du Cap, and it was the film festival, had just been over, and I'm swimming laps in the morning, which I did for sanity. And then a man in a raincoat was sitting there. And he sat there, and every time I looked up, he was still sitting there. There was not another soul. It was raining, as I remember. And I finally get out of the pool, and this man comes over to me and says, my name is, I'm an Israeli, I have Canadian citizenship. I loved that film you made about Sakharov. And by sheer chance, this is a Russian physicist who was in the Gulag for many, many, many years. The day that we showed the film, the Russians, out of nowhere, released him. So the film took off. And this man was a very wealthy investor in American and Canadian companies. And he said, I'll give you a check for $20 million if you go on making films like this.
Wow.
Not bad. And so it was a big gift. And it was a long time ago. And so I became very good at asking for people to help make my dreams come true. And I think if I have to say, if there is anything in my life that has allowed me to be ballsy, flat out, and asking people for something I had no idea they had, or I did have an idea they had and I just wanted it, it was because I had a vision and a mission for something I wanted to accomplish. Sometimes personal, sometimes in terms of my career. And here I am, a very old woman at the Broad stage at a time when in this country, if we don't keep art alive, we are going to die as a nation, and that can't happen. So now, my job, instead of being the executive director of a performing arts center, is I'm back in my early feminist days of being an early feminist who is now, I hope, part of the vision to save our world through art.
Wonderful. The three of you are awesome. So, and we are going to get to that later, and what we need to do on that. But I'd like to go back to Katharine. Well, first of all, Jane, I saw a clear connection from what you wanted to do as a child, that you kept making announcements to your mother about what you wanted to do, and it all came together. Yeah, isn't it wonderful? So it's like, be careful of what you wish for, right? It happens. Or who you say you are. The other thing that's fascinating about all three of them, although Katharine is probably more clear about her fundraising capacities and what she's done, but both Susan and Jane said, I don't know if I want to talk about fundraising, or I don't know if I'm really a fundraiser. And excuse me, did you hear anything coming out of their mouths that indicated that they weren't fundraisers? But there were a couple of things that you did say. And it was in a way that Katharine and I were old friends. So I know Katharine, and I've just gotten to know Susan and Jane. But how critically important relationships are. How critically important relationships. So I'd like to go back to Katharine, because one of my first interactions with Katharine was when she was about to launch United States Artists. And I'd like you to talk about how you did that, how you brought together the kinds of things that both Jane and Susan have talked about in terms of skill sets, and then advance that idea. And I'll just never forget the energy you brought to the classroom. That's where we also worked, was in a classroom together.
So Sarah and I have been, we've team taught classes out at Claremont, at Drucker, at Kravis, at CGU.
Yeah,
it's
right.
like, it's the alphabet soup out there. And now I teach for GLI, the Kennedy
right.
Leadership Institute. And I'm probably going to start working a bit with the Sotheby's Institute as well, which is really fun. So my career has been this kind of crazy trajectory. I went to Colorado College. I ended up in Chicago. Chicago led me to Washington to a fellowship at the National Endowment for the Arts. I ended up in New York. Lived and worked there for 12 years, then went back to Minnesota to work at the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis for 8 very happy years, and then came out to LA to head development at LACMA. And so, literally kind of ping-ponging my way around the country, working in the arts, working out of the arts, just kind of sliding around. But, you end up connecting with certain people who kind of stick with you along the way. And I had this kind of amazing call one day where a headhunter who I'd known called and just said, the presidents of the Ford and Rockefeller Foundation are putting, many millions of dollars down to support artists. And, you've been a fundraiser and a grant maker, and we want to talk to you about that. And I said, what's a grant maker? I'm like, what kind of term is that? And I was at the time running a small family foundation, which we've talked about a little bit, for Leonard Nimoy and Susan Nimoy, and which was, a total blast. And, anyone who asked me, I say he was indeed the nicest man in the universe. Truly an incredible spirit and an incredibly generous human being, and the two of them together were a dynamic duo in philanthropy. So I worked with them and created a small program where we were funding artist residencies in visual arts institutions around the United States. And Leonard would say, well, are we getting the biggest bang for the buck, Kathy? And I'd say, well, you've put $2 million into this thing and you've funded 700 artist projects all around the country. Like, what do you think? And he'd be like, okay, we're doing a good job. He was always a big enthusiast about that. So now, I'm a fundraiser and I'm a grant maker. Okay, yeah, so go on. And she said, well, we're starting this organization to support artists. And
How much did they start with?
22 million. And so it was... again, I think if there's a theme in my life, it's just interesting opportunities come your way, and it's just like, just do it. It's like, I have no idea how to run a dance company. I have no idea how to run a foundation. Sure, I can do that, what's to stop you? I stupider people than me do this stuff every day, right? So I just figure, whatever. So I go on this interview, and I'm way outside the box, because they've been interviewing foundation people with very serious credibility in the foundation world. And I got up there, and I had a little time to think about it, and I said, if I had, money to give to artists, I'd give 50 artists a year, $50,000 each in all fields and all disciplines, and I'd raise $50 million to make it a permanent endowment to fund it forever. That's what I'd do. And I have friends who live in this city, and this city, and this city, and this city. I drew this big map of the United States, and I know a lot of people who I think would care about this program, and they hired me. Which is kind of crazy. But, and then we just hit the ground running. We based it in LA. I wasn't going to leave Los Angeles. I was living here. And I was very clear about that. It wouldn't be in New York. It would be in LA. We created a brand that was very much a Southern California brand. I wanted Southern California arts leaders to be very active in making the selection for who those winners would be. And we'd done a bunch of research. I think probably there's a theme emerging as well, I would imagine, from all of us, which is research. What is the topic? What do you need to know about it? learn as much as you can before you make any big decisions. And research is a huge part of the work we do with donors. Who are our donors? What do we need to know about them before we get in front of them? And the more you know, the more quickly you can develop a rapport. So in terms of research, I looked across the country and I'd done research on all these fellowship programs, actually for Susan and Leonard, who originally wanted to start a fellowship program. So I was this weird, like, little de facto expert in this stuff. And if you drew a line down the center of the country, all the money that went to artist fellowships that were called national went to artists in the Eastern United States. And I was like, okay, that's really not good. And so when I did my pitch to create what became United States Artists, I said, we're going to have as much money going east of the Mississippi as west of the Mississippi. And that's going to be a big focus of our work. And so everything we did, every decision we made, the panelists that we put together to select the artists, the people who nominated the artists, came from both sides of the country, and Alaska and Hawaii, and ultimately Puerto Rico. And so it was just, let's create this truly national program. And after 8 years of running it, we really were a national program. We did have as many artists on each side. And so it was a really fun thing. But what I got to do was tap into all of those relationships I'd built over time and tap into the relationships of our board. So we were founded by the 4 presidents, all women, Presidents Ford, Rockefeller, the Rasmussen Foundation in Alaska, and the Prudential Foundation based in New Jersey. All 4 women, super clear, gave me the money, get rolling, let's just do this thing. And then they opened up their Rolodexes for us. And, Susan Beresford, president of the Ford Foundation, was close friends with Mike Bloomberg. Well, that's a good guy to know. So Bloomberg gave us $1 million to get out the door. I wanted to make sure that we had a big stake in Southern California, so the first person I went to was Eli Broad. I met Eli through my work at LACMA. I pitched him. He gave us $1 million. So it was sort of, you sort of start at that sort of top level, and that sets a bar for a brand new organization. And so we kind of did that all across the country and kind of built a very strong geographic balance of wealthy people who care about artists across the country, and that was kind of how we got it started.
So I have one thing that I want you to tell us about, because I think it's critical, and I think each one of you have a different experience or a similar experience around this. And that is, how did you help donors understand and appreciate the value of their contribution? What did you create for them that was a lasting indicator and memory, so to speak, of their contribution to a particular artist or set of artists?
So every single one of those 50 fellowships were available to be named. So you could have a USA Smith Fellow, Smith or Fellow in music, let's say.
Yes.
And so I was matchmaking a lot. That was a lot of the work that I was doing. So one of the weird facts I learned was, just in terms of thinking about the arts, you have people who love the arts, right? Big group of people, they love the arts. They love the history of the arts. So they care about symphonies, and they care about the history of theater, and they care about the history of the visual arts. So that's the biggest sort of subsector of philanthropy in the arts. Then you have a smaller subsector of people who care about contemporary art. So they fund MoCA, or they might fund contemporary theater at the Broad, or they might fund contemporary symphonies at the LA Philharmonic. Even smaller, tiny group, people who care about artists. So as I traveled around the country, I had to kind of figure out in each community who really cared about artists, and it took me some time to figure that out. And then it was, what kind of art and artists do they care about? And then begin the matchmaking. And, I met people who loved commissioning new symphonies, got them engaged with funding work in our music fellowships and naming those artists. And so what I would try to do is not only, make the connection to what they cared about, but then once that artist got named, introduce them, make that connection. And the Barry Jenkins story is a perfect story. So a couple out of Omaha, Nebraska love film, Paul and Nancy Smith. And Paul they funded a fellowship, Smith Fellow, and that was the Barry Jenkins Fellowship. And they met at Telluride just this last year, kind of reconnected after I had introduced them. And Barry was like, I've used your money to make this movie, and I really hope it's going to go somewhere. And of course, you can imagine probably some of the happiest people on Sunday night were the Smiths in Omaha, Nebraska, So I wanted to make those permanent connections, and great things came of that. And I think in many cases, long-lasting relationships came of that, and those artists are still connected to those donors. So that's just, one of a million examples.
Tell us quickly how you recognize those donors. What was your gift to them?
So the biggest donors, it's going to prompt me, I'm just like completely brain dead after wearing high heels for 3 weeks. It's just been a killer, I got to tell you. I'm so happy to be in shoes that are like comfortable. I did this thing called the Mater Medici program. So if you gave our organization $1 million, you were what I called a Mater Medici. And $1 million funded 20 of our fellowships. So like Eli Broad, over 5 years, funded 20 fellowships. And what I would do is have a photograph taken of the donor with the artist they had supported. And these were in amazing locations. So, for instance, Michael Bloomberg had just opened his philanthropy headquarters in New York, and he had this beautiful outdoor garden on the top floor of this fabulous Beaux-Arts building on the Upper East Side. And we did this beautiful photograph of, I think, like 50 artists that Bloomberg had funded. And there's the mayor of New York standing in the middle of this group of artists, hosting a cocktail party, again, connecting, getting to know them. All the artists he funded were from New York City, so that was kind of cool. All the way up to a couple up in Sonoma, Steve and Nancy Oliver, big supporters of the visual arts up there, and they had built this amazing tower on their property, actually for performing artists to perform in, but it was designed by a visual artist named Ann Hamilton. And so I did we set up a photograph with this amazing photographer of them walking through this tower with some of the artists they had funded. And then what we would do is we'd frame the photograph beautifully and present the photograph to the donor to thank them for their support. And then we made a portfolio of all the members of the Mater Medici, and every time we sent them to the donors, and every time a new photograph came, we'd send it to all the donors to say, add this to your Mater Medici portfolio, because I wanted to be on their coffee table kind of year-round. So just making those connections and kind of being present in the donors' lives.
And the album was spectacular. It was a beautiful, beautiful album. So I just in terms of connecting dots of how you provide that kind of recognition and level of engagement. And Susan, you were about to say something.
So I love your story about ways to tailor what in the development world we call stewardship. Right. And recognition to what is important to the donor. And I guess one story I would tell is I recently had a situation in which we created a beautiful framed work that was pictures of all the different places that the LA Phil has performed over its history. We're coming up on our centennial, so we're getting pretty excited about this. But I was working with a couple who were in their 90s, and they had actually gone to the Philharmonic at all of these locations over the course of their very long marriage. And it was a meaningful gift to them because it brought back all those memories. And a lot of what you do in gift planning is you're working with people, toward the end of their life many times. It can be earlier, but it tends to be toward the end of their life. And they're thinking about what we love to call legacy. They're thinking about, what do I want to leave behind after I'm gone? And so what you really do is you tap into memories. You tap into listening for what was important to them that has connected them to your organization. And this particular thing that we created for them was very meaningful. And when the husband passed away, it's still in the house. And when you go to visit the wife, you see that, you know, she still has it hanging there. They also, we have many people who like to commission works, and the LA Phil commissions a lot of new work. And whenever one of our donors does that, we oftentimes will have a piece from the music that's been signed by the composer and is initialed to them. You know, it's written to them. And those are all very nice ways of stewarding people. The other thing that we do a lot in planned giving is we create what are called legacy societies. So if people tell us that they've left a gift in their will or their trust, we add them to the roster of people who have done that, and we publish that list. And legacy societies, you know, they have all kinds of different names. Ours is named after our founder. And we have an annual luncheon in which we feature one of our musicians, and people get to come and hear that musician talk about their journey. And there are often these wonderful stories about how they, you know, how they've devoted their life to music and how they came to be musicians in the first place. They'll talk about their parents. Sometimes they're young performers who will say, you know, my mom really wanted me to be a doctor. And I kept saying, no, I really want to be a violinist. And finally, when I got to play with the LA Phil, my mom said, yeah, I think it's okay that you're a violinist and not a doctor. So it's stories like that, and people who have long associations with us and who have decided to leave these kind of gifts. They love hearing those stories. So you provide them an opportunity not only to be with people who are like them, who want to leave this kind of a gift, but also to hear our musicians, to see the impact of what that gift is going to be, and hear them talk about how important it is to them that the orchestra is on a good footing financially.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mrs. Gottrocks, and I was recently widowed, and I have several children, adult children. One of my children's children had a serious medical issue, and so I made a pretty significant contribution to a local hospital where he was treated, and in fact, it was a wing of a hospital. And yeah, it was, but they were wonderful. They really took care of my grandson. And but I also love art. I love to collect art. I recently had the opportunity, and I love the Southwest, and I love Georgia O'Keeffe, and I love the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. And it's fabulous, and I love that country. It's like, oh, my Lord, what a beautiful land. So I bought a Georgia O'Keeffe. So I have a Georgia O'Keeffe to add to my collection. And I like to travel. I like to have a good time. And I also have made a contribution in my husband's name at a local university where he enjoyed a short term of working with them and building a business school, and so I started a scholarship program in his name. But you know, there's something more to life, and I want to do something different, and so I let this friend of mine, I think she does something in the arts, I don't know what she does, but I met her recently, and she had this kind of great personality, and I thought, you know, Kathy DeShaw. So I invited her over, and I just want to hear from her about what's important in what she's doing, and maybe think about what I want to do in the arts.
All right, so take a pause. Have a seat, Mrs. Gottrocks, please. Don't fall. We need you around. So you know, people get thrown in front of us all the time, someone called me today and wants to introduce me to General Electric. I'm like, great. General Electric, fantastic. Well, Thomas Edison, did invent the light bulb, and, he was involved in the movie industry. And I'm like, yeah, and we're featuring him in the museum. So, yeah, GE, bring it on, right? And so and everyone has these connections that can be really fun and meaningful for us and can be helpful to our organization. So Mrs. Gottrocks has connected with me. She's interested in the arts. I know this about her. But before I talk to her, I've got to do my homework. And this is where prospect research comes in. And how many of you know that term, prospect research? Have you heard that? So that's good. It's something that really the hospitals and universities do, all the time, magically. It's a history of those institutions. The minute you graduate, you become an alumni, and trust me, you're on the list of the development office, and trust me, if your family has money or you're making money, they know it. And the reason they know it is because they have prospect researchers who are constantly learning this information about people. So from her introduction, we know a little bit about her. We know she cares about the arts. We know she cares about collecting visual arts. She loves the Southwest. She's supported a hospital. She cares about kids, obviously, has grandkids and children. Cares about education. Those are a lot of broad categories here. So now we have to do a little bit of digging. And what are we trying to find out? Well, we're trying to find out more about her. What were the level of gifts that she made? What kind of church does she belong to? What school did she go to? What are some of the threads that have gone through her life that can connect with what I'm trying to connect her to? And let me then toss it over here to Susan.
I was going to say also, the other thing we'd want to try and know is who are her cohort of friends, and
right where I
are
was
any
going.
of those friends affiliated with our organization? Because oftentimes, in addition to having one of us, a professional staff person, be involved in fundraising, you would also hopefully enlist a board member or a friend to be the door, what we call the door opener to having a conversation, a relationship. So.
And what kind of clubs does she belong to? Is she a golfer?
I'm not a club.
She's not a
No clubs, huh?
I
spent too many
hate
do doing
clubs.
disco dancing.
I just don't want to be stuck in these old ladies' clubs.
Exactly. So, and we know that she's a little self-indulgent.
Oh, no.
She, fabulous, darling. You've never looked better. We have to think about the approach to her. So we've done our homework. We know a little bit more about her. We've invited a good friend to come along on a call who has a personal relationship with her.
And maybe we've also found out that you like parties. Do you like parties?
Oh, I like to have a good time.
So we think about what is the thing we're going to introduce you to right off the bat to convince you that our organization is really a fun place for you to be involved with.
And you know what? I also love meeting people who have done amazing things in film.
So maybe we invite you to something where you would have an opportunity to meet those people.
Yeah, there's this woman who's got a beautiful English accent that I'd love to meet. And I think she was hooked up with HBO or something like that.
In another life. Well, now you might like to come with me and meet the tango dancers that are coming on Saturday evening.
Whoa.
To do an extraordinary exhibition of dancing. And I thought perhaps you might enjoy a tango lesson in the lobby of the theatre before anyone arrives, perhaps with a bottle of champagne to go with it.
Well, my husband passed away like 8 years ago.
They're all men.
Cool. And tell me, I'm liking this more and more. Tell me about your theater. Where are these dancers?
The dancers are actually in the theatre, but they're coming from Argentina.
Oh,
And they're with us for a weekend. And
love
the
South
theatre
America.
is in Santa Monica, you know, it's by the ocean.
Oh,
The
sounds
breeze is
heavenly.
gorgeous.
Oh, yes.
There's a wonderful outdoor patio.
Ah,
And we thought we perhaps would have a dance class with just a few friends with the dancers. There are 10 of them. And we would start in the outside and dance around the grass
oh my.
and then slide into the theatre.
Oh, I like the slide part.
And then perhaps afterwards we could go backstage. And when everyone's gone, you might try a tango with one of the dancers on the stage.
Wonderful. This sounds wonderful. So tell me about your theater, though. What's it all about? I mean, is this something that is for public consumption?
It is a wonderfully small performing arts centre. We have 2 theatres. We have a 500-seat theatre and a 100-seat theatre.
Wow.
One is called a black box, which means it has no windows of any kind. It is literally a black box. And inside it, we create magic. And we transform worlds. In this last month, we've had a wonderful piece of Broadway theatre. Story of a woman who lost her husband, and when he died, she found out that his business world wasn't quite what it might have been. And he left her a list of things to do that showed how he loved her. It was hilarious. It was very sad. She was wonderful in it, an 80-year-old actress
Oh,
who
really?
just opened on Broadway to
Really?
rave reviews again, followed by a piece of one-man showmanship. It was actually a piece about depression and mental health that made you sob with laughter for 2 hours.
Oh,
And the
my.
audience just were completely involved. The young actor whose story it was, and it was actually a true story, went to several people in the audience and said, "Would you be my school teacher?
Oh,
Can I call you at night when I can't sleep because my mum died? She killed herself.
how sad.
Would you be my father? Would you be my brother? Would you be the girl at school that helped me with my math homework?" And all of a sudden you had a room of 100 people totally and completely in the world of this small child. It was called Every Brilliant Thing. Every day of his life, he wrote a card with a brilliant thing on it to take to his mom, who was depressed at home in bed, to show her how wonderful life was.
Wow.
Ice cream that doesn't melt, the dog that licks your face. And so
How do you do all of this? How can I help? It sounds wonderful.
there are lots and lots of ways that you can help us.
Really?
There are lots of ways that you can help us, and we should talk about it. But you should come first and let us just immerse you in it.
I would
And
love
then
it.
we'll find a dozen ways that you can help us.
Wow. Okay, I'm cooked. Thank you.
So what happened here is she made that personal connection. She made that you saw Sarah get engaged. You saw she talked about a husband who died. She'd obviously known her husband, her husband had recently died. She made connections to fun. She knew this woman liked to have a good time. She didn't want to sit around with old people. So it's, what is that connection? She also knows that women outlive men and that women are more philanthropic than men. And so you always want to stay very engaged, particularly with widows, because they are often looking for new ways to connect in the world and often have significant assets. And the other very smart thing she did was she didn't ask her for money. She wants to make that connection. She wants to bring her close, get her excited about the work that's being done, invite her to something else, continue to develop the relationship, bringing her closer and closer, and then there'll come a moment where she'll ask her to make a gift, and it's probably not going to be that big of a gift to start. A lot of people think $5,000 is a really significant gift to make for a first gift to an organization, even if someone's worth many, many millions of dollars. So it's a dance that we do in many cases over many, many years, hopefully. So
Thank you. We didn't rehearse this, by the way. This was all this was all very spontaneous. So thank you all, because we wanted to do a little interlude, so to speak, that would be a little lively, but also have some lessons contained within it to get back to our chapter and how we build out on our themes. So thank you, each one of you, for your contribution to that. We just generally talked about it in the green room, and that was it. So we're good. Yeah, we're good. We're good. So now I'd like to do a wrap up with each one of us knows how important the arts are, how important culture, and as Jane so eloquently articulated as she concluded her opening kind of statement of who she is. So we're in this time where so many things that we value seem to be under some kind of threat, politically, policy-wise, budget-wise. And what I wanted to do is to have a brief dialogue with each one of, with us 3, 4 of us, about how do we not survive but thrive in this kind of environment? How do we engage in apolitical kinds of activities that strengthen this core value of ours as a nation, in engaging and involving the arts in our daily lives, in our communities, in our nation, in our children's lives, in every part of our lives. So I wanted to have a conversation, because it's not about us just protecting our own organization. It's like, no, I'm going to pull in my arms, and I'm going to close the world around me, and I'm just going to protect me. So what are the kinds of things that we need to do as we think about moving forward in the next few months, next year and beyond, because we see this kind of chipping away?
There's a story I'd like to tell, but first, for me, I think what I'm finding is other people who work at and run arts organizations, from small theaters to large organizations, are actually picking up the phone to each other and saying, here we all are, which piece of this can we do together? And building bridges that might have been unthinkable even 6 months ago. So I am talking to people across the country that I actually don't know, but I know of. They've been in their organizations for years, who when I call and say, shall we have a chat about this? Absolutely. I came from one such thing, from a big performing arts center in Boston, and spent 2 hours having just that conversation. And then the other part of it is this. The Broad Stage we're going into our 10th year. We have a very well-educated, sort of upper middle class, pretty much white audience. And one of the things that we do extremely well is we do opera nights. We have enormously generous donor who underwrites it and makes it possible for us to have singers who only sing at the Met, who only sing at La Scala. Occasionally they come to LA and sing in the opera, but pretty much they do not sing in 500-seat houses. One of the donors who come to this, and he's not a large donor, he's capable of enormous wealth. He's generous in very small ways to us. Has a young daughter, she was 15 when I met her. and she wants to be an opera singer, and she's been training her whole life. So he invited my husband and I to go hear her sing. And it was in the local Catholic church in Santa Monica. He's Jewish. They filled the church. They have been doing it for many years. There's a program there where they have classical music with an orchestra and various young opera singers come. And it costs very little to come, unless you want to sit in the very front rows, and then it's $200. And he gave John and I some $200 seats, but we couldn't park, and by the time we got there were no seats left. And so our host said to me, just find a seat anywhere and put your bag on it, because if John's still parking the car, you won't be able to sit down. So I did, and I sat 2 rows from the back in this pretty large church that holds about 400 people. And we progressed with an evening of classical 18th and 19th century opera. The audience were people who had just come from cleaning someone's house. There were people with their grocery shopping. There were people with small children. There were people with their dogs. There was a Hispanic family sitting in front of me, a mother, a father, 2 sons, 16, 17, and 3 little girls, all in their Sunday best, clearly dressed to be in a church. And the music started, and I looked around. People were in tears. There was complete rapt attention. And at the end of it, the entire congregation, if you like, stood and cheered. I was totally stunned. And this family sitting in front of me leaned over and in Spanish started to have an incredible conversation about the depth of the third passage of Verdi when she was singing in the tone of And I looked at this, and I've been thinking about it ever since and where we are today, because it seems to me that one of the things I can do today, and we've talked about this at the Broad for years, but it never had this application, is take the Broad on the road. So I would like to see us take our artists and to take local artists, because we have so many in Los Angeles, to the farmer's market, to the local pub, to any small space, to this space, anywhere where people who do not normally pay money and think that they belong inside a performing arts center can have art and artists in their life. Because as far as I'm concerned, it's going to save us.
It is. Kathy, we talked a little bit in the green room about an experience that you had in terms of, and I would call it collective impact, or networks that work as another way of building relationships to address a particular issue, and it was community-based. And you talked about involving the NEA environment.
I was very involved for many years when I was at the Walker in Minneapolis with a group called Minnesota Citizens for the Arts. And we lobbied every year. We went to our Capitol Hill in Minnesota. We talked to our state representatives, convinced them of the importance of the arts. We made the economic argument. We made, every argument you could know. And, funding kind of came and went, just depending on the state budget and the mood of the governor and what have you. One governor, as I was leaving the state, made a huge change in the arts, and suddenly arts institutions were getting all kinds of money. And then Jesse Ventura was named the governor of the state of Minnesota, the wrestler. And the only promise that he made to the citizens of Minnesota was that he would get the license plate tab fees reduced. And he did that. And that was all he did, except for cut the arts. And so what was a huge budget got slashed back to nothing. And so there's just been this seesaw of funding in Minnesota. And then after I left, this amazing thing happened, and I have no idea who figured this out, but the state is doing this to this day. They created something called the Legacy Fund, and the Legacy Fund are the arts and cultural organizations the environmental organizations, and the NRA, the gun lobby. Why? Because the NRA and the conservation community care about the same things. The NRA wants land to be hunting on, and the environmentalists want to save that land. And the arts kind of slid in the back door saying, hey, we've got these cultural treasures. You want to save natural treasures. We want to save cultural treasures. This is the legacy of the state of Minnesota. And they added, I think it was a quarter penny to every gallon of gas sold in the state of Minnesota. And now places like the Walker Arts Center are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars a year from this legacy fund. And they also plugged it in such a way that it was like a 100-year commitment to the legacy of the state. So the point that I was making when we were talking earlier was, you know, times are tough. You get interesting things happening with strange bedfellows. So people who you think might not necessarily be in your same court might be in your same court. And I think we have to become very creative as we look to a moment where we may lose the National Endowment for the Arts, we may lose the National Endowment for the Humanities, things that we all sort of take for granted. Kind of everything's on the table right now. So we've got to get creative, and we're creative people.
And I love that story because what it does is to illustrate the critical importance of finding common ground. What is it that can bring you together? And as I think about, again, collective impact and culture and that example, Are there ways in which we can work across sectors, across fields or disciplines in order to advance the importance of the arts and culture? I mean, where does education come in? Where are there other areas? Did you want to say something?
So the thing I would also say is that another instance of collective action is when you talk about an organization, for instance, like Chorus America, which provides resources to choruses all over North America. And the choral world is a bit like the small theater world in the sense that these are very small organizations, by and large, underfunded. They're run by volunteers. They don't have time to do all the research that we talked about, prospect management, prospect research. They don't have any of those resources. And one of the things that Chorus America has done that I find so interesting and compelling is they have done these longitudinal studies over a series of years that they call the choral impact studies, where they look at the numbers of people who actually sing in the United States, the numbers of people who are employed doing this activity of choral music, and they provide resources so that if you have a children's chorus and you want to get funding from your state legislature, you have your talking points without having to go and do the research yourself, because you're basically like the mom that's, volunteering their time to support this children's chorus. So organizations like that are worth knowing about. They're worth researching and finding out about. I mean, there's Americans for the Arts. There's the Arts Action Fund. They have lots of data that I think is very helpful to all of us that are in the arts about looking at the bigger picture, the ways in which we really make a difference in people's lives, and that goes across institutions, that isn't just specific to your particular organization. So that would be, I think, one thing I think we shouldn't lose sight of in this new era.
So I think that we probably ought to, open it up for Q&A, and if you have questions of any of us, please feel free. We're at your disposal. Questions?
Yes, please.
Huh? There's one. Yay. Just tell us who you are.
My name is Brenda, and I am considering attending Claremont Graduate University.
Cool.
My question to the panelists is, can you speak a little bit more about some of the struggles you faced? Because I know you've talked about your successes. It'd be good to hear about some of the struggles you faced and how you overcame those.
No, she didn't say failures. It was struggle. And we could call it a glass ceiling or a glass wall, or what obstacles were in your path. Jane.
You know, I went into the world of business because I knew that I had to provide for my family. I probably would anyway. I was in therapy 100 years ago and said, gosh, if only I'd stayed married, you know, I could have written a book. And my therapist at the time said, no, you'd have had 20 women in your garage making cannolis. I know you. So I think the struggles, for me, certainly women of my generation, were that there was very little space for women, and you had to ignore it. You had to see it, you had to acknowledge it, and you just had to push through it and ignore it. And I am not saying that it is over. I don't think when you go into the workplace today, it's going to be a walk in the sunshine. I hope it will be mostly. But certainly for me, it was literally a sense that I had no option. And it became very political for me at a very early age. Yes, I had children to support. Yes, I wanted to be whoever I was. I wasn't sure I had any idea who I really was. I had to find her. Luckily, I'm old enough, I'm close to finding her.
It's a slinky deal.
But I think that never giving up, even when it is really hard, even when you go home and look at yourself in the mirror and say, truly, seriously, is this worth it? This job may not be worth it. It might not be the right place for you, but you cannot give up. And if for no other reason, there are millions of little girls looking at you and expecting you to do for them what they will one day do for their daughters. So if I sound like this is truly political for me and always has been, it is because it always has been. And I don't think as women that has changed very much.
Is this on?
Yeah.
It's on. I just like talking about money. I mean, I think, you know, we raise money, we're about money, money makes the world go round, it's an economic engine. It is absolutely shocking to me that women are still earning less on the dollar. I think this is absolutely worth fighting for. It enrages me, but you got to talk about it. How much money do you make? How much money does your friend make? How much money does the guy across the hall make? Why does he make more than me? How do I get more? What do I do to do that? I mean, I have been fighting for every penny I've ever gotten in my life, and I have been very clear about it. And of course, now in the nonprofit sector, it's published. If you're one of the top 5 people paid in an organization, that's on the internet on GuideStar on the 990, page 14. Why do I know this? Because I look at it all the time. I want to know what people are making. And I want to know how I compare. And I think it's super important to be very open about this conversation and to challenge it when you are not being paid what the men in your world are being paid. It's just super, super critical and important. So that for me isn't really so much a stumbling block or a failure. It's more we as a society need to really step that up, especially women.
Susan?
So these are both really good comments. I'm going to give a third perspective, which is to think about yourself as you're going through this work. So fundraising has successes and it has no's, lots of no's that you get before you get a yes. And oftentimes there's a maybe, and sometimes the maybe can be You really have to rethink your whole idea of how you've approached your relationship with the person you're working with. And the best way to do that is to take care of yourself. So I would advocate that in addition to paying attention to whether you're being adequately compensated and being persistent, that you also think about, how can I be my best person? If that means I get enough sleep and I exercise and I eat well and I reserve time in a very demanding profession where you have a lot of nighttime work, you reserve certain times for yourself where you don't work every night. That's, I think, also part of presenting your best self to the donor. Because if you get burnt out, you're not going to do your best work. So it's, and I see that with a lot of younger people entering this field where, they come in with a big, lot of energy, and then you see them start to get worn down by it. And you've got to be able to keep going back to the first principles. What is it that makes you passionate about this organization? And think about that. And in order to do that, you have to be well rested enough to be able to, have that thought come through your mind. It can't just be a grind. So that would be my suggestion. Great.
I'd like to add a point too, and this goes back to adult development and my slinky and our conversations. And that even though I said glass ceiling, glass wall, an important other metaphor is a labyrinth. There are times when we start down a path and it doesn't seem to be the right path. We seem to hit a place that we can't move through. At that point, in terms of a life cycle, if you have, and I will take you back a second before I finish that, is that in a life cycle, you have new beginnings, whether it's a new career or a new relationship or a new child or something. But these new beginnings bring a high level of energy. And then another stage in that life cycle is a plateau where you might be saying, is this all there is? Maybe there's something I need to check out here. And you might say, oh, I need to fix this. And you kind of recycle yourself and say, I can make this work. This is where I belong. But then you may get on this other side where you feel like you don't have the energy you had when you started out and the new beginning. And at that point, you need to do this check-in and say, maybe this isn't the right place for me. Maybe I'm in this labyrinth where there's not the pathway for me to go forward. Sometimes it takes a lateral move. Sometimes it takes backing up, taking a little break, dealing with a family situation or something else, and then recalibrating yourself, letting go of the thing that doesn't work or things that don't work, or saying, I need to rethink where my values are, where my mission is, what it is, this life theme that seems to be feeding me. How can I renew it? How can I replenish it? How can I nurture it to bring it back, to move back into this new high energy and the new beginning again? So I encourage you not to think about life, even though everything in our society, from going from K to 12 to graduates to undergraduate to graduate school, and then this linear path that you start here and then you progress. Don't think of your life in a linear way. When you think of life in a linear way, there's a place where you go up, and this is part of adult development. And adult development says, well, you go up and there's this linear point, you retire, and then it's like, what happens? Nothing, right? It's like, don't accept it. Don't accept it. It's like, okay, then how do I recreate my life? And how do I take what I've learned in these different stages, these different experiences, and instead of having a wall that I run up against, I turn and take another path. And I think that's one of the most important things we think about, because life is filled with obstacles. Life is filled with opportunities as well. And if we're open for the opportunities, the obstacles fall away. And so that's kind of my way of saying, don't let those things get in the way. And you did the same thing. Each one of us have done that. And that's life. We just have to figure out how to make it work for us and get back to how do we care for ourselves. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that allows us to be for the world what the world needs us to be.
And I'd just like to add one thing to that, which is, I think it's true even today that as women, we have been trained from birth, even today, to put everybody else first.
Yes.
And learning to put oneself first,
Right.
exercising, eating well, getting enough sleep, having some fun, is the
Tango.
Is almost the hardest thing to do.
It is.
Still today, it is
Yeah.
the hardest thing to do. And that is a life's work.
It is. Other questions?
I have a question, actually. Is it okay if I ask it? It's Tori.
Oh,
No.
okay.
No.
I have the microphone,
Yes,
so I'm going
Tori,
to do what
yes.
I want.
You're permitted, and then there's a question
I'm really
over
sorry.
here.
Teresa, you're up next. So I've been thinking a lot lately about this phrase that mentored people mentor people. And I'm wondering if each of you could speak to the mentors that you've had in your life and how that affects how you mentor others, and whether those mentors were men or women, and whether or not that had an effect.
Can we also speak to, and maybe not mentor, but the life model that had an impact?
Yes, you can do whatever you want.
Okay.
So I've been extraordinarily lucky in my career in terms of the mentors I've had. And they've been both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing that's been so amazing is not only that they taught me specific things by showing me how they did something incredibly well, they sort of modeled behavior for me, but also they visioned for me something that I might not have visioned myself. So the example I gave of my boss at KCT saying, I think you could do foundation fundraising, and me thinking, what is that? I don't know what that is. I knew what it was, but I couldn't see myself necessarily in that role. That's, I think, a very important thing that a mentor does. And so as a result of having had so many good mentors, I now am at the stage in my career where I consider it to be essential that I be a mentor to other people who are now doing fundraising in my organization. And even outside of my organization. And I was going to suggest that I think one of the things that is really important if you want a career, a long-term career in development, is that you start to put together these networks of people who are, who you can pick up the phone and call when you hit one of these obstacles. And you know that they'll be willing to take the time to sort of talk you through it. And I try to be that person to some of my colleagues, both at the LA Phil and outside of the LA Phil. And I'm very grateful whenever somebody does that for me as well. So I think mentoring is a hugely important part of any career, and specifically of this career.
Well, one of my mentees is in the house tonight, Miss Sunny Rouchet. Sunny and I got to know each other 5 years ago, maybe? When were you at Gagosian? Yeah. We met through a mutual friend, Joanne Heiler, who runs the Broad Museum, and we just hit it off. We had a fun lunch, and we got to know each other, And we've been on this wild adventure together. She calls me, I call her, we get together, and we just have this wonderful relationship. And I'd known Sunny for maybe 6 months when she invited me to her wedding. It had just sort of hit us that fast. So I'm really grateful that I have this wonderful young woman in my life, and that we have a lot of fun sharing each other's lives together. So that's a fun thing.
All the mentors I ever had were men. I don't think at the time I even knew they were mentors, frankly. I look back now and realize when I was first at CBS, my boss's boss's boss said to me, "If you just keep your head down, you could run this shop one day." And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" So I think over the years, especially when I worked in the television business, there were several heads of companies who begrudgingly said, "She'll probably be okay." I think what it has led to is that I have mentored in my career a lot of people, mostly women, not entirely. And I do know one thing about myself: I am much tougher on the women who work for me, even today, than I am on the men. I expect the men to be competent and good. I expect the women to be goddamn brilliant. And mostly they are. And it's not something that I say proudly. I just think it's true of who I am.
I too, because I moved in a career path. I used to be a fundraiser with United Way, if you know what United Way is. And all of those that I worked with were men. And so for me, it was their recognition of the value that I brought and a respect for what I brought that made the difference for me. And I could feel it. I could see it. And when you have that kind of connection with people, you can see and feel it. And then I go back to, in terms of a life model, it was my mother. And she was legally blind, but we never knew she was. We were raised on a farm, and she was an educator. And we can remember pointing out these pictures of fall colors. We lived in upstate New York, or something else in the distance. And she'd say, "Oh, that's beautiful, that's beautiful." Never knew that she couldn't see it. And her life was about teaching and learning and helping others develop. And so that was the life model part of me, was that's what I grew to know. And that was what my life was, whether I'm teaching or I'm involved in community. It's that giving back that was so important, and not complaining about what I didn't have, but recognizing what was of value. And those people did do that. So I felt like I always had the mentors that I needed and the support I needed, but it came in so many different ways. There was a question over here.
Hello, my name is Teresa Condito. I am a CGU graduate 2014 and former student of Sarah's. Excuse me, Mrs. Got Rocks, not Sarah, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah. We do the Got Rocks with you?
You did, I'm pleased to
yes,
get to see it
was
again.
at the Drucker School.
I've actually brought it up in interviews before.
Oh, yes, okay.
So actually, after CGU, I transitioned my career in the arts to fundraising. And I've been working for a few years now in fundraising. And one of the trends I've been observing is that some of the more traditional methods of fundraising, such as perhaps direct mail or telefunding, are starting to lose efficacy. And I wanted to hear if perhaps any of you had thoughts on sort of building relationships in the digital age.
Whoa. Wonderful question.
I have some thoughts.
Yeah, you. Kathy, you really nailed that one.
Is this on? Oh, it's on.
Yeah.
So I think, if there are some themes that are emerging here, I think generations are certainly a theme. Sarah has been a mentor to me I get to have the pleasure of spending time with Sunny. And, you know, different generations you approach differently in fundraising. You know, I have a niece who's 15. It's not about texting. It's all about FaceTime. I have the average member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences is 61-year-old woman, white, right? I'm going to talk to her differently than I'm going to talk to the 15-year-old, right? And so we have to think about what are the different strategies and approaches to most successfully reach those people, whether it's in a mass market environment or if it's a face-to-face kind of conversation. And obviously, you don't have the time in the world to reach all your donors in a face-to-face setting. So you do have to kind of break down and think about what does your audience look like and what are the strategies I can use to reach that audience. And a lot of time it involves a lot of testing. I mean, I kind of thought I left my direct mail days behind me, but I'm now working with a direct mail open audience. And so we've got to think about really smart strategies to reach that 61-year-old white woman. And you know, you also look at crowdfunding. I mean, I created the USA Project's crowdfunding site for artists to raise money. Those are small campaigns. The average crowdfunding campaign raises $10,000, but the average campaign also brings in about 200 donors. So it's like now you've got this universe of donors. Some of those people could potentially be bigger donors for you down the line. So the lesson we would say to the artists is put up your project, raise your money, and now every single year, you can go back to that same group of people because 66% of donors repeat their gift every single year. And if you're smart, they'll give you more money. So as you start to analyze who are those 200 people who are my friends, and you roll up a couple that could maybe do a match for the crowdfunding campaign you do next year, because matches work really well in a crowdfunding environment. And so it's different strategies for different age groups. It's different strategies for different kinds of projects. I mean, I think one of the most fun things about being in the world of philanthropy is it's so creative. I mean, you can do different stuff all the time. And you know, you sort of like throw the noodle up against the wall, and if it sticks, yay, and if it doesn't, you know, good try. What's the next good idea, you know? So it's an opportunity to be really creative, I think.
Other questions?
So, just a sequel question to that question. Are you doing any? Just a second. So, just to a sequel question to that question just raised, which is what I'm hugely interested in. Are you currently doing anything, any fundraising initiatives or any kind of marketing campaigns to specifically target 20-something, 30-something affluent, you know, donor prospects in your organizations? Anything?
We definitely have efforts to attract people who are that generation, who are 20s and 30s. It's more from the standpoint of getting them to become patrons of the LA Phil than it is specifically asking for gifts. But we understand very clearly that we need to build the next generation of audience. And so there's a lot of effort put around that. We have a program called CODA that is for younger folks to come to the LA Phil. And it's been, I think it's been quite successful.
Tori, are we? Yes. I want to, first of all, I just want to thank Jane and Susan and Kathy for being fun, for being the leaders that you are in the arts and in life in so many ways. A very impressive 3 women. So I'd like you to join me in thanking them for being here.